Hello and welcome to the first episode of the Anomaly Project, the brand new weekly show that delves into all aspects of the paranormal and anomalous world. I'm Marcus Louth, and with me, as it will be every week, is paranormal researcher, investigator, and lecturer Steve MERA. Steve, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm looking forward to tonight's show, actually. I'm very aware of our guest's work and what he's been involved in over the years. So, absolutely. All these things, all these areas fascinate me, as people know. So, I'm really looking forward to getting into these and finding out some of the interesting things that people don't often hear about.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, and with that in mind, I mean, anybody that's spent any amount of time in the paranormal world, whether as a enthusiast, researcher, or investigator, they'll have found similarities and connections between different fields of interest. You know, like why, for example, there's so many reports of Bigfoots at UFO hotspots, or why do paranormal locations also host beast-like creatures? Now, one person that's investigated numerous paranormal incidents and events and visited many strange locations is our very special guest tonight. That's paranormal researcher, folklorist, host of Beastly Theories podcast and television's Weird Britain, Mr. Andy McGrath. Andy, thank you very much for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm a little bit sort of rushed and on the back foot, so to speak, but I'm very happy to be pleasure to be with both of you.
It's a pleasure to speak with you, and we're going to delve right into it, basically. So, as I was saying there, in the paranormal world, there are numerous connections between what at first appear to be different areas of interest. You know, UFOs seem to be completely different to Bigfoot, and hauntings seem to be completely different to cryptid creatures. You've investigated numerous paranormal incidents. You've gone to many strange locations. Then, what connections and similarities, have you found both between fields of interest and also with folklore and how they could be interpreted in the modern world?
I find actually with for instance, things like cryptozoology, for example, there's a lot of folklore connections that you find. There's often a past creature that's been described in a folkloric way around some time in the past. And there's usually a bit of a gap in the middle, and suddenly in the modern world, it's got a kind of resurgence. It's come back, and that Loch Ness Monster is a great example of that. Of course, we've got the water horses of the past, and there are reports as well in the past, but generally speaking, it's a supernatural creature. It's a mythological creature that suddenly comes to life or to the forefront of our attention in 1933 when people start spotting it more and more around the loch and taking photos and other bits and pieces. But there's other things as well. And even when you look at Bigfoot, you've got tales of hairy men like the Woodwows all the way through Europe, and they are kind of mythological creatures. They're not really painted as being flesh and blood animals, and yet people in the modern day think that they have seen them and believe that they are real. And as to whether this means that people are seeing something that people saw in the past and described, or somehow in our minds there's a kind of mental library that we hold of all of these folkloric things and images that have been passed down through generations by word of mouth, or sometimes even with the symbolism that we've noticed around us. Perhaps these are influencing our minds when we see these things, influencing our description. And one of the things that reminds me of what could be happening, or two of the things, in fact, one is when Moctezuma's men first saw Cortez's ships sailing towards them, and they described them as floating mountains. And it made me think, well, they're clearly not floating mountains, but that's the closest picture their
Yeah.
mind could create for what they were experiencing. I think that's really telling. And another thing, again, to do with a little person type creature, the duende that you find in Central and South America, and which emanates from Spain and Portugal, the countries that colonized those countries. And strangely, the Philippines also colonized by Spain. And either the Spanish were like exporting these diminutive, mean little dwarfs all around the world, or this colonial folklore tradition has been colonially spread to these other nations, and they've either inherited the description and they've applied it to things they've seen, so it could still be real things, or they've inherited the idea of it, and when something unusual has happened to them, their mind has projected onto it. And currently, that's where I stand on those things. Not that they're not real, but our description of them is tainted by what's available in there, culturally speaking.
Yeah, I find it fascinating. And the thing is, I've spent some time in the US with those what we refer to as Bigfoot hunters. You
Mm.
know, big guys, and they're out there hunting the Bigfoot. And I've also done research. I've also talked with a number of people in the United Kingdom, and it's surprisingly how significantly different it's considered. I mean, the Bigfoot guys, the Bigfoot hunters in the US are saying, look, this is a real creature. It's hyper elusive. It's very difficult to find, but it's living out there in the regions where humans just do not go very often. And occasionally we're going to encounter them. They must be populations of these things, and not just in the US, but maybe any others. But they deal with it as a hyper elusive type of creature. There is evidence behind these footprints, there's hair samples, there may be scat, all sorts of different things that you would say, oh, it lends evidence to this thing being real. Now, the question is in the UK is what is real? And, and this is the problem. What is real? Because when we look at the UK, the Bigfoot hunters say in the US, you can't have it in the UK, basically. We don't think that there is. I think that is just misidentifications of deer and whatever. However, there are some really good cases, isn't there, Andy, of people witnessing these things in
Absolutely.
the UK. And we cannot just simply say it is a hyper elusive creature because, I mean, any hunters will say you've got to follow the food source. There's got to be a population of them, considering how long they've been seen over periods of years. And not just it just relates to Bigfoot, but it also relates to allegedly sightings of Dogman and other similar cryptids. So, what's your take on that divide between what the US consider hyperlusive creature and the UK is a little bit different?
I think with the UK, it's a perception problem. It's more than a perception problem, but the perception from the American side is that you don't have the space and you don't have the room or the food surplus for such a creature. We do have the space. I drive around, I've done 25,000 miles since 2023, all around the country. Sometimes there's just nothing but trees and fields and mountains and forests and, animals. So there's the space, but that doesn't make it so just because we've got the space and the food. And as people who know me know for a long time, I was really signed on to this British Bigfoot thing, trying to find evidence, trying to look deep into it. I met one or two witnesses. I will say wholeheartedly, I absolutely believe that they saw what they saw. Absolutely, not doubting that at all. But there's a big problem with most of the witness sightings, and that is they're in the hands of too few people. Of course, it's a small genre, so that makes sense. And there's just not enough provenance in them. They're often second, third-hand reports, even fourth-hand reports that I had to deal with, and I just couldn't support it anymore. Not to say that there isn't a Woodrose or British Bigfoot, or there wasn't at one point, but judging by the evidence I haven't seen and the places I've been to looking for them, and some of the veracity of the reporting, its provenance, it's third, second-hand reports. I'd have to say that it's either functionally extinct or was extinct at the time that people started drawing and carving woodrose onto the churches of Britain and Europe and the rest of these places. Not to say there wasn't such a creature. I mean, if you look at the Yeren in China, very similar carvings and pieces of art going back more than 2,000 years in some cases of the Mao Min and the Yeren and all the variations of their hairy man. The Himalayas is the same. Obviously, that's really wrapped up in a lot of spiritual sort of ideas about supernatural creatures that also embody a sort of a flesh and blood persona at the same time. And it's, I think, especially in Nepal and places like that, it's indivisible. Even when they have a fake goat's a goat skull cap in a museum and a fake monkey hand that they're using and that they know are fake, somehow the veneration of the object makes it real. And that's hard. It's not that they're lying. It's just that they think about it in a different way because they believe the creature is real. You understand that? So it's a strange thing. Whereas in the UK, we're way past this. We're in a post-religious society almost. Folklore is having a resurgence, and so is stuff like the Woodwows, which was essentially transported from Europe to America, which then became, in my mind, the description for their Bigfoot. At least the European perception of what the Native American Indians were telling them about. And the same with Dogman. Dogman is simply just the werewolf. I wrote about that in my book, Beast of Britain. I said, the Dogman, rebranding the werewolf. Are we just trying to find a less embarrassing way to talk about werewolf reports? Essentially. Yeah. So I think this is where we are. It's not that things can't exist, and I'm very against the long ago and far away explanation. Yes, there can be a Yeti in the Himalayas because that's not near us, or in the uppermost parts of Canada because that's not near us. We don't have to confront that. Something could survive here. Big cats are definitely living here and surviving and not being detected. We know so many people have seen them. I know personally 3 or 4 people have seen them. One of whom knew so little about big cat. She described it as a black lioness. Yeah, it was just obviously a panther. And so I think they could be here, but supporting the point I think you're making, I don't think that they probably are here in that physical sense.
The physical.
Yeah, I mean, with that in mind, I mean, there are many reasons who will say that Bigfoot and cryptid creatures are supernatural creatures, even though they might be here temporarily. And that's why a lot of them, you can turn around 1 minute and they're gone. People say they just disappear almost in front of their eyes. Going back to what you were saying about, through colonialism and immigration of that nature and bringing over their stories and legends with them as well as themselves. And thinking of that from a supernatural perspective, how many of these sightings of Bigfoot could actually be, like generational memories that are somehow, if you believe, like cellular memories that are kind of locked within somebody's DNA, basically, and then so how much could that play into it? And the fact that, as you say, whatever these supernatural entities are, we perceive them through what we know and how we, like you say, how we manage to put what reference we've got for them, basically.
I agree. Yeah. I think that's a lot of it. I mean, generational memory, I don't know a lot about, and I don't know of any scientific cause for it. I know it's been demonstrated through experimentation several times with various individuals. I'm not taking away from that. But I don't know a lot about it. But I also do know that the mind, it's an amazing machine, and you're taking in information from your surrounding all the time, from your youth, from your childhood. I remarked to somebody the other day that I was passing. So I am a religious person, but we have a Catholic family background. I never went to a Catholic church as a child, but we were from an Irish family, so it was in the background. And I was passing down the street a few months back, and a funeral parade passed me, and I crossed myself and I took off my hat and I stood there while the cars passed. And my wife said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. That's what we do. It's just what we do." But that was picked up. I was never taught to do it. I was never told to do it. Clearly, just absorbed it from my mixed cultural background, the place I grew up, some of the background religion, and I applied it to what I knew. And I knew to do something that nobody had ever told me to do. And I didn't know that I was doing it at the same time, which is very strange. And I think that applies to everything. The minutiae of folklore, like I say, Bigfoot, Woodwows, lake monsters, Pierce and water horses, all around us, carved, written in dragon stories, existing on the periphery of our minds all the time. That's information that you can make up. Once something shocking or scary happens, and by the way, it doesn't mean that you haven't seen a lake monster, even though stories came from somewhere. But that's probably why Nessie always looks like a plesiosaur to us, for example. Now, I want it to be a plesiosaur. I love that legend. That's my theory. I want it to be true. I'm not objective about it at all. If I was to see Nessie, very likely I would see 100% a living prehistoric animal in the lake, regardless of what's emerged from the waters. So I'm just not discounting anything, but there's a psychological side that plays into everything that we see, which changes. By the way, sorry to labor the point, but which changes culture to culture. Yes, there's dragon reports, hairy man reports everywhere, but the perception of them actually is, even the drawings you see. There's a great great book on mystery animals of China. I think it's called by David Xu or Zhu, if that's the right pronunciation. A really great book, and a lot of the Yeren or Mao Min and these different uh, Chinese drawings of wildmen have very Oriental eyes.
Oh, right.
And I thought that really stood out to me because, of course, you'd make them look a bit like you because they're humanoids. Yeah. Why do they look sort of East Asian and not European or African, for example? Strange.
Yeah, it is really interesting, and I can
Yeah.
understand it. I mean, we have incidents more in more modern times. I mean, we have obviously things like the Mothman and the Owlman and
Mm.
those sightings, which are kind of more modern days as opposed to sort of ancient times. But I have had two encounters with things I can only assume to be a supernatural in origin. And one was a creature like a dogman, and the other one was a banshee, funny enough. And
Wow.
and I was not on my own. I was in a vehicle. We were driving very, very slowly, literally like 10 miles an hour. We saw it fly in front of us, shoot down behind a wall in front of us. And as we drove past, we were kind of just watching this thing, and it was watching us. It ducked behind a wall, and the two white hands came up, and the head came up. Crazy hair, a lot of it, completely white face, black eyes, and an open mouth, gape. And it was just watching us as we were watching it. What was really interesting, Andy, was we didn't respond to what we saw until about half a mile later. And all of a sudden it was like we were switched on. Oh my God, did you just see that? So it was like that we wasn't able to react or act in regards at the time. Because normally, like you, like me, and probably even like Marcus here, we would say, what the hell is that? And we jump out, we want to know what's going on. That opportunity was gone. We weren't allowed to have that opportunity until about half a mile later. I just thought that was really profound. Have you ever heard of anything like that where you don't act as the way you should do?
Yeah, I have. I think that's also a psychological thing to give you a safety sort of mechanism. So
Yeah,
you're in a situation where fight or flight isn't available to you, and it just kind of keeps you calm. Sometimes when people say that some weird attack or something happens, and everything slows down for them, it's almost as if they're moving through the scene quite slowly and serenely, or the scene is moving slowly, they're moving normal speed. And I just wonder if it's that, and you don't feel the shock of things until you're in a safe position and you can absorb what's taken place.
that's a
You
good
know, it's
point.
there was a funny thing. I love Sherlock Holmes, and I especially love the I like the old Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce ones a lot, but I also love the Peter Cushing as well. And there's one of the episodes I remember Watson says to one of the ladies there, she's nervous, and he says, I've been in lots of warlike situations, and you always feel most nervous before something happens, but when it happens, you don't feel anything at all. You're just dealing with it, and then afterwards, you feel nervous again, sort of upset. I thought that was really great because that's exactly what happens in life. You have this fail safe so you can deal with these crazy situations. For most people, anyway, that
Absolutely.
keeps you steady, not calm, even almost sort of numb.
Well, when you have an experience and seen something that you just does not make any sense, and it's also witnessed by a third party who's with you at the time, you have to assume, okay, well, we saw what we saw, but in hindsight, when you think about that, you think, well, if I
Mm,
see something as crazy as that along with somebody else, then I can never rule out the fact that other
mm.
people will witness, be it a dogman or a werewolf, a yeti, a Bigfoot, or whatever. Because I think once you can accept the fact that something like that can be witnessed, then anything is probable, feasible that somebody could see.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And just just as a point to any witnesses listening that I've spoken to, was just as a point to reaffirm, it doesn't mean you haven't seen something. I guess I'm just really tied up in the psychological side of myself with these things and how we perceive things and how things spread in perception, not in event. I don't think people, for the most part, obviously some people have issues, have a few problems, and they're prone to seeing things, and there's an attention aspect to that. But I think those are more few and far between. Generally speaking, the people I speak to have definitely seen something, and they are very concerned about it. And they're normal people who just can't unsee what they've seen. Whatever's happened, whatever the thing is, be it fairies, be it mermaids, be it Bigfoot, Loch Ness, an alien abduction, whatever it is, they're 100% certain that it's happened. And also, they seem to have this sort of lack of risk assessment in their lives afterwards. Even when it's a risk to them, be they a lawyer, barrister, or judge, they just can't stop talking about it. You've got to tell everybody and sort of get some I don't know, reassurance about what happened. Like this happened, this happened. I can't unsee it. It definitely happened. I know they're real. I've got to let everybody know. Of course, to everybody else, it's like it's nervous breakdown time, right? They're like, oh, okay, poor Steve, he's lost his marbles finally now. He's seen a banshee and a dog man. Whereas
Not even
you and I know you're as lucid as the next person. You're as lucid as the next person. And
yeah.
until you're in that situation, you can't describe what it is to somebody else to see those things.
All reasoning disappears, and you become 100% observer.
Mm.
And afterwards, you're trying to deal with that afterwards. But I was so pleased that somebody else saw it, and I said, "Don't tell me, don't."
Yeah.
Let's say it at the same time, sort of thing, because I wanted to make sure that it's not just conformity that somebody's saying that I saw that as well. And we definitely saw the same thing, and it was it is crazy. I have no explanation for it, but like I say, there are strange things that do happen. People do witness these things, so I can think like a witness, one of them witnesses now, and say, do you know what? I can understand how a woman in the middle of maybe a built-up area can witness something quite profound, you know.
Mm.
And often I think it's tied to the land, but I'm not Irish. I wasn't in Ireland. And I was in a location where it was known for various different phenomena to take place. And it was sunlight, and the sun had just was going down, so it was still quite nice, orange skies. And it caught me on off guard completely. And there was no predecessor warning, nothing, no signs of anything, no sensation. It just happened, and that's what was so confusing. And do you know what, Andy? I did the same thing. I went round telling everybody. They must have thought I was nuts. That I've seen a banshee. I went back straight on to Google and and I typed in banshee to look for images, and bang, there it was. Some
Wow.
white-faced lady with crazy black hair. I mean, it was so detailed. The dress she was wearing was great. It was going a bit tatty. But I remember seeing it as she moved unusually fast, and she came across maybe about 20 foot above the road and shot down behind a limestone wall to the right of me.
Wow.
But the way she went down, like Superman, arms behind her though, I would have thought she would have head dived in behind that. There was no turning flight to land, and the movement was so profoundly fast. But I definitely remember seeing the dress wafting like this behind her as she travelled. How crazy is that, Marcus?
It's just like you say. I mean, there's just so many bizarre things, and these are just the ones that we're speaking about. How many encounters go unreported? Just through people fearing being mocked. It kind of leads me into, I mean, Andy, what particular event or case or even personal incident or even a folklore tale, what made you feel so compelled that you really wanted to investigate the paranormal and try and get to the bottom of what lies at the heart of all this stuff?
Well, it's interesting actually because I've been absolutely obsessed with cryptozoology for the longest time, and in a very flesh and blood way, actually. I just was look into the idea of these strange creatures still existing, almost like the age of exploration hasn't ended. Let's go and find new things. And I do believe there are new things out there that are normal, actual animals to find. But in recent years, and it's what's funny about it, in recent years, since starting Weird Britain, I was actually quite, well, just dismissive of it in a way. And I love folklore, of course, but it was just something from the past stories. And when they asked me to start filming Weird Britain, I said, okay, that's fine. But I said, normally I only deal with cryptozoology, I don't really know much about this other stuff. And I was asked to go and do a piece in Rendlesham Forest about the UFO incident. I was like, oh, okay, I'll have to look that up, I guess, and find out about it. And in a similar way to cryptozoology, I started noticing is that the witnesses' reports were very similar. There's similar kind of character, similar reactions to what they'd seen, similar sort of stages of disbelief and telling everybody, as Steve just mentioned. I thought, well, this is odd, isn't it? I mean, they're essentially reporting the same psychological symptoms and physical symptoms after having a strange experience. So that means there's something in it. You can't deny that now, Andy. Whatever it is, there's something in it. But then I remembered as a kid growing up in our house, which was very old, and then also in a martial arts club that my federation that my family ran. It was a really old Salvation Army building. It was a different building before then. There's lots of ghostly encounters all the time there. Excuse me. And they were so frequent that we just used to perceive them in our house of family as a sort of irritation, you know. So we'd be sitting in the living room, normally on a sort of a late night, Friday or Saturday night, where my parents would go out with their friends, and we were old enough to babysit a little bit. And we had this sort of double living room, and then to the side there was sort of a tainted glass, you know, like you get in a bathroom or something, a square that would look into the hallway, and you'd see this big black shape of a humanoid shape run past, and then boom, 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 there'd be this big sort of running up the stairs. Or you'd be walking in the room sometimes, and you have a behind you, there's some, and you turn around and be on your, you know, your heckles for like an animal of a sort of explanation, and your back would be up or lifted off your bed slightly and dropped and things like this. And it was just such a feature of living in that house from a young age that actually, until recently, I didn't actually think back upon it with any sort of weirdness or interest. You know, like actually, for a long time when you were a kid and living in your folks' house, and you were bothered by these paranormal experiences. And then the same in our martial arts school, there would be the sounds of children running around and laughing and things like that. And we had a little gym bit downstairs that when I was a teenager, I used to work out there trying to keep fit. And occasionally you get a bit freaked out, you know, you start to feel a bit odd, and you hear people running up and down the stairs to where the mat was, where people would practice upstairs. And so, yeah, it was just strange. And I thought, well, actually, it's not like you don't have any experience in this. You've got an experience, whatever you may think about it now as a point of origins or anything, you know, from a religious person's point of view, you definitely know that people do experience things because you did. That sort of started this aspect of it. And since then, last 2 years, I've met a lot of people that have seen a lot of things and had a lot of experiences which can't be denied, you know, whatever they may be.
Yeah, it's really interesting once you open that door. Do you feel that the phenomena of what we experience is intelligent to know that we are interested and are more an opportune moments to have those experiences because of our interest, or do you think it's just pure luck being in the right place at the right time?
I think it's multifarious. I really think it changes, and it probably changes to do with whatever the phenomena are and how they've been invited in the first place, or how they've come to be there. I really think that's different. So you know, people talk about poltergeist and things, or demonism and other bits and pieces, and I think in the case of our house, people have done stuff there, Ouija
Oh,
boards and other things that had brought things in, and those were not nice things, basically, and they were sort of taunting us, I suppose, or trying to scare us. And in other places, I think that, I mean, maybe residuals or whatever the term is for these ghosts walking the same path. I know the box tape theory has been disproven in the sense as not, you know, not being proven, but I think there's a lot to it, you know, that the environment records a scene and replays it. Sounds logical. Maybe that's just that.
it does. I mean, if that's the case, it might be something more of a natural earthly phenomenon, a rare one,
Mm,
then something we might consider the same as a haunting, in a sense. I think
mm.
residuals are significantly different than what is like intelligent or hauntings and things. That seems to be something profoundly different. What do you think, Marcus? I mean, there does seem to be a big difference between, going to Gettysburg, where I've been, and it's known for its haunting of soldiers, reliving the event. and it's not always bad things. It does seem sometimes it seems to be heightened emotions that's recorded because there's been like a pub in York, a public house, and the recordings there of our people from a time past, which are laughing and enjoying themselves. And the only commonality between these is heightened emotion is involved, and maybe that imprints. And then you think to yourself, I wonder if years' time they might overhear something about us and consider them us being we're haunting them, when in fact it might be just a recorded event, just little bits coming in and then who knows? I mean, this is what I love about this subject. It is so vast, isn't it, Andy? And it's so many different factions, and it doesn't matter what field you step into. There's equally is it's going to be somehow it tends to leak back into other areas. You can't just seemingly stick in one box, because there's always going to be a crossover somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I
I
agree with
agree.
that
I think.
completely.
Sorry, Marcus.
No, you go, Andy. That's fine.
No, 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 don't let me. I'll carry on for ages. You go.
Oh, well, all I was going to say is you were speaking there, Steve, about, you mentioned Gettysburg and you mentioned build-up of energies and things of an horrific nature happening and that leaving an imprint on us. But I mean, Andy, what do you think about the locations? How important are the locations to paranormal activity? I mean, you could think of things such as ley lines and convergence of
Mm.
energies that perhaps enhance these imprints, or is it a case of like, a certain building, a certain field, or something just taking in all that raw emotion and then just replaying it and spewing it back out? I mean, how
Yeah.
important are locations to all of this?
Mm.
I mean, I agree with Stephen in a way, thinking that things can be recorded into the environment. That when you think of, I don't know if you have ever had to make a pinhole camera in high school. You get the box with the reflective, the camera paper, and you leave it out in the sun for half an hour, whatever it is, 10 minutes, and then suddenly you go back in and you've got this picture that you've recorded. You've captured. You would just, it was a cardboard box with a piece of paper inside. How did you capture that picture? You created an environment which the picture could be captured. That's essentially what captured film used to be anyway, and audio and sound and the rest of it. How is it even possible? You have me now on your screen, or we can hear this audio even being played back to us. It shouldn't be possible, but it is, because we know we develop tools that capture that sound or project it, etc. Do certain buildings, certain environments have the ability in certain atmospheric conditions to capture these things and replay them. It's only one explanation. I understand it. But I think, yes, locations could matter in that way. And in another sense, you've got places like Cannock Chase or Monsterland and other places in America where there seems to be a whole pantheon of different paranormal things happening all at once. And that to me just makes me a bit more, not suspicious, but I'm curious about it. Because these are normally quite small areas as well. So there's not that things could exist there as real flesh and blood animals or entities on a permanent basis and survive. It must be that something is happening. I remember, and this is only from one perspective. I remember reading when I was reading some sort of biblical treatises before that some demons have animal forms. At least in their humanoid form, they have animal faces. Which is what I suppose the goat Mendes and Baphomet, whatever, used to be, was supposed to be one representation of. Others look like pelicans and owls and the rest of it. And I thought, well, that's interesting, because that somebody was trying to convince me before that Bigfoot was a demonic creature, or the Dogman was, which seems more convincing than Bigfoot, right? That looks so horrible. And could we be looking actually dark entities, whatever you want to call them from your philosophical perspective, coming or being brought into our world in a various forms that they either inhabit or people are most prepared to see when they see them. And they're drawn into certain areas because things have happened in these areas, either from practice, from illicit ritual practice, or just because it's a good place for them to enter and mess around with people. I don't know. And I've not that I've come over to that perspective, but I consider it more viable these days for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a great analogy, because if you look at the stories from witnesses over and over again, and not from various different countries, dealing with the aftermath of having an encounter with a dogman or some other strange creature, by all accounts and purpose, you would expect when you're being pursued, and some people have been pursued by these, that it's a predator. And we
Yeah,
all
exactly.
what a predator does when it reaches its prey. But that doesn't seem to be the case, Andy. I think, according to the reports, it's like the game is how to generate vexation, stress, fear, all those things as much as possible. And then when the game is up and you've got somebody who's fallen over and they're shaking like rabbits in headlights with this thing over the top of them, it just runs off. It doesn't do what any predator would do. It just runs off. So it's like all the game's about fear. But the only time I've really referenced this in other areas is poltergeist phenomena. Because poltergeist phenomena
Mm.
creates fear, vexation, and stress. And it's seemingly, according to some surveys and research, that it's utilizing that energy for the next act. And it's a bit of a vicious cycle.
Mm.
And I thought to myself, well, I wonder if is there some relationship between these fear-feeding parasites, in regarding not only cryptids, but also in the poltergeist stuff? Is it a physical manifestation of some sort? It gets very interesting when you realize these things should be predators and they don't act like predators, which when you have the opportune moment.
Now that's very true. I wondered about that. Why is it, apart from a few odd reports, that the Bigfoot or the Dogman never actually attack anybody? I've heard of the Yowie doing it once or twice actually, but generally speaking, the Dogman never attacks a person. You never hear saying, if you're somebody, I was clawed, my arm was torn, like you'd get an American Werewolf in London or some movie about werewolves, right? Or a Silver Bullet. It's never actually like that. They're just insanely terrifying animals. You see them, they're ominous, they're intimidating, and then you leave or they leave, something happens, and then you bear that trauma for the rest of your life. But
So,
maybe they're stuck in energy from your fear. I've heard about, you talk about reptilians and things sometimes, right? Feeding on
Exactly.
people's fear that there's energy there somehow. Who knows?
Yeah.
it's very intriguing.
I mean, you mentioned reptilians there, and I know that's a bizarre subject to get into, and
Mm.
these could be more based on legends and likely are than anything else. But again, that's the one place where I've heard this multiple times that they kind of feed on energy, negative energy, and they almost create that. You know, the more they're feeding off your energy, the more negative you're feeling. It's like Steve said, it's going round and round and round. Much could be said the same with cases of alien abduction. I mean, that sense of absolute fear that an abductee goes through. I think it's interesting as well that we talked about poltergeist phenomena and such things as shadow people. We could also include in that. Many people have gone to discover that they've been victims of alien abduction. They also experience seeing shadow people, hearing strange noises in the house, things of that nature. So to me, that's another example of how these paranormal events are all connected. With that in mind, we mentioned about reptilians and folklore. How do you think could there be partial truths in folklore and legends, and how could they relate to some of the modern day phenomena such as alien abduction or Bigfoot sightings, hauntings, things of that nature?
There was a funny thing. We investigated, talking about that, folklore and modern abduction, investigated the Welsh Triangle and the Broadhaven incident for a recent UFO special for Weird Britain, where we went and met witnesses, and we're not experts, but we went and talked to people about the event and the places and the rest of it. And one of the um, alien spaceships was seen flying out to sea and landing in Stack Rock, I think it's called, just off the coast.
Yes.
And what's strange about that rock, it's in the old, it was known as the home of the fairies. The fairies
Yeah.
would be seen floating across and landing in Stack Rock, the Steve, of course. And
Great.
I thought, isn't that fantastic? We've got a direct correlation between fairy lore and UFO sightings. And sure, I mean, yesterday's woodwose could be today's Bigfoot, yesterday's fairies, today's, UFOs, and etc. And is it sometimes just modern terminology? Are we just looking at things through a modern prism and we don't acknowledge the past? Because of course we live without a past in today's society too, in a way. We're not really conscious of that inherited tradition, at least.
No.
Many people aren't, the way our parents or our grandparents would have been. And is that what's happening?
It is really interesting about Stat Rocks. I mean, of course,
Mm.
I recall reading that book at least three times. about Broadhaven, the incidents that took place. They witnessed beings going into the rock as well, interestingly enough.
Mm.
It's not the first time that we have an association with the rock, the geology, rock areas like this, mountain tops, cliffs.
Mm.
The phenomenon has been seen to go into them, not only UAP, but we see reports of many, many different things in sort of interesting geologically located areas. And I often think to myself, I wonder if there's something geology-wise associated to some of the cryptid stuff. I mean, does it tend to take place in just remote locations, or is it hilly locations, mountain locations, or is it generally anywhere? But some of the most recent things do seem to be in association to rocky, outlaid areas, cliffs, mountains, those sort of things.
I mean, with cryptids, I don't really know. It seems to be more environmental, which is why and I still probably partially really am on the flesh and blood side of things because Bigfoots are often seen in forests. Mountain environments would be isolated, so that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Lake monsters in deep bodies of water makes sense. It doesn't. I have heard of a lot more urban experiences with dogmen or werewolf-like creatures. By the way, it seemed to be more going into an urban setting or a village or somewhere close to where mankind is and intentionally terrorizing people. I don't know if that was your experience, but I do know a lady, American lady, Monica, who's a great Bigfoot researcher, actually. And she said, I've never seen a Bigfoot, but I was surprised one day in the middle of Texas, whilst driving at night to pick up my child, on the side of a street to see a dog man just crouching there and sort of leap towards the car, leap after me. And she said, I know I saw it. I can't deny I saw it. I was not interested in dog man. I was not looking for it. And yet that's what I saw. And in a Texas suburb of all places, I just didn't believe that was possible. And she said it left her with a feeling of terror. The physique of this creature, the behavior of this creature, and also that it's in the suburbs essentially. It's
It
like
is.
seeing a werewolf in the middle of like Hampstead or something.
Yeah,
What they're doing there.
they do. There's reports of Bigfoot in suburban areas. It's really fascinating.
Mm,
You know, when they're acting like an urban fox would do. Going through trash cans.
yeah, yeah.
I find it fascinating. I know when you talk about sea creatures like Loch Ness or deep bodies, interesting, tend to be deep bodies of water. It fascinates me about why do they all seem to be, resemble the same sort of creature? I mean, we've got the sea creature or the Morgor of Cornwall, haven't we? Which
Mm.
like is seen to be very similar. If it's not Champ or like Olgo Pogo, and many others, they tend to be reports of very similar type creatures, as if not all the same, which fascinates me.
Very similar. I'm actually finishing up a book on that at the moment, second in the Beast of the World volume about water monsters. And there are lake monsters and sea serpents in there. And the lake monsters, yeah, they seem to either be like a Nessie plesiosaur type, Nessie champ, etc., or, this long, sort of skinny Ogopogo type, very elongate creature that undulates through the water, caddy, the rest of those, the scrimsel in Iceland, those kinds of creatures. And it's interesting actually. They seem to have a very few forms, at least in that the lake monster and sea serpent variety. And I think that it's fascinating. But there's all kinds of things. So at the moment, I was just finishing the section on um, you know cephalopods, like mysterious cephalopods,
Yeah.
giant jellyfish. The kraken of all things. And all of these different creatures, or even was one an oil pit squid. It's reported in America. These squid that were found in the bottle of an oil pit in a big garage somewhere, and they didn't know where they came from, and they were living in there. These squid, or at least they thought they were squid. The same old story. The sample was taken, the sample went missing, etc., etc. Um, and it's really, really fascinating to me that people are seeing similar types of things normally, and that's all over the world before we had global news and global internet, and we were connected as peoples, as nations, with each other's knowledge. Before all of that, people were reporting the same kinds of things, which says either we all came from the same place and spread out with the same um, folklore, or we've all been seeing really similar things in the same way as, okay, you've got a panda in China and a sun bear in India and a polar bear in the Arctic and a grizzly bear in America, but all the descriptions that these people are giving you would be bears if you didn't know what this creature was. There was the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
They're describing the same kind of creature in different forms, and maybe that's also what we're looking at.
I even heard there's a pizzly now, which is a part polar bear, part grizzly. I don't know how true that is. What do you?
No, yeah, they've bred a few times, but I think they're becoming a bit further south occasionally. Polar bears, and there's been a few documented cases, by all accounts, of
Wow.
grizzlies, which sounds terrifying. Like a grumpy polar bear. It's the
It's,
worst possible combination you could get.
it's the worst combination of two breeds that could come
Yeah,
together. Claws
exactly.
and, of course, the polar bear's intelligence.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not good. Over the last couple of years, though, Andy, there's been a lot of push towards the area of more paranormally orientated associations with the cryptid. There was a documentary out maybe a couple of years ago about the Bigfoot UFO connection. I think that's what it
Mm,
was called. And now we have things such as the flash of beauty, paranormal Bigfoot, where we've had witnesses saying that they've seen a Bigfoot which is seemingly crouched into a fetal position, becomes smaller, shrunk, changed color into like an orange, and then it became a ball of light and shot off at high speed. I don't know. I mean, you don't get many reports of like that, but you do get reports of balls of light and UFOs associated with Bigfoot.
mm.
I think there's about 300 reported documents now. I think about 60 of them came from a location in America known as Chestnut Ridge, where there's been a consistent amount of sightings like that over the years. But there seems to be this effort now to sort of look beyond the average of that is just a large creature living in the forest, that it might have associations to something else. Some researchers believe that it has a connection with UFOs. Others think it's a more spiritual phenomena, where that they've been following tracks, and then suddenly there's like half a footprint, and then they're gone. And this is in the snow, and it's like, where did he go? Did he get snatched up somehow? Reports of things where they are cloaked, that they've seen something or filming something. I've got about 3 or 4 videos have been sent to me over the years. I think you may have seen some of these, Marcus.
Mm.
And these are videos of people out on location, and suddenly there's something. And to me, you cannot help yourself just think, oh, it's a bit like the Predator. It's kind of bending light around it. There's lots and lots of stories and efforts being pushed in that direction. I did like the Flash of Beauty documentaries. There's 2 of them. I found some of the reports very, very interesting. But with that, but quite surprising that there was quite a number of people who claimed that they had taken prints of Bigfoot prints and took them home, and apparently had some unusual paranormal disturbances take place because of them bringing home. And I thought, well, that's unusual. I don't hear that very often, because I know researchers out there have got prints, loads of prints, and they don't have that seemingly. So who knows? But there does seem to be a bit of an effort to push in that direction to try and find out, does it have an association with other subjects? Because they've seemingly been compartmentalized over the years. UFOs, the paranormal,
Mm.
Bigfoot. The guys in these fields would never deal with each other. But now there's a bit of a mingle between them.
I'm finding there's more bleeding between the different genres, definitely over time. I I don't know what's happening. Again, never doubt the witnesses, even if I'm unsure. I accept it at face value. I think that's important to do that. Otherwise, people won't trust you, with their sighting. So never doubt the witnesses, but I have seen different trends moving over time, and it seems weird that it goes in this weird cycle that suddenly everybody's reporting one thing, then everybody's reporting a different thing, then everybody's reporting. You've seen it probably loads, Steve, over your time. And
Yeah.
the thing was the crawlers thing recently really brought it home to me again. Like suddenly there's crawlers reports everywhere, like these gangly white sort of weird night creatures, and which was kind of essentially based on some weird spoof video from the early noughties, I think. Or
Yeah.
at least that's when it got big, right? I was on YouTube, and I just thought that's weird because I remember Bigfoot switching to Dogman and Dogman switching to Mothman and so on and so forth. And I'm sure in the other genres this also happens. That's not to say this blade isn't valid, because I've definitely heard of what would in the past been called ghost lights associated with wild men, which would be the same as like orbiting Bigfoot, right? So I think there's definitely something that I do also know somebody who is not into this genre, by the way, on seeing weird animals with UFOs, who actually claims, and he's 100% certain of this, that he saw a triangular pyramid-shaped UFO at the end of his alleyway outside his house, just outside of Cardiff, in the 80s. This would have been, I think, and some dinosaurs. And I
Yeah.
thought, it said, really? It said, they said I wasn't hallucinating. I was awake. I saw this big golden pyramid in the sky, and then I walked to the end of the garden, long garden, and he said a stegosaur poked its head through the garden gate, looked at me, and then walked down the alleyway, followed by a T-Rex. And then I ran to the end of the alley, the garden gate. I looked out, and they were gone. And whether these were hallucinations that were given to specifically tie into things he was interested in as a boy, perhaps by this object in the sky, and perhaps these other things are similar to that, playing
Yeah.
into your own desires or your mental library again. I don't know, but I believe that whether it's a hallucination or no, he definitely had that experience, and yet I just don't have any explanation as to
There's-
why a stegosaur and a T-Rex walking in his back alleyway
Well,
in the 1980s.
what's interesting about that account, though, I mean, I think, and it could go a long way to explaining such things as Loch Ness and Bigfoot, is that some people, there's been documented cases of this at Skinwalker Ranch as well, where people have seen UFOs, but not just seen them in the sky, they've seen them literally enter the sky through what they could only describe as a portal. It's from another dimension, another time, and then that portal's shut. So, if there's any credence in those sort of sightings, and going back to your friend's sighting, is it possible that if there's a portal or a gateway open that's allowing this UFO, wherever it might have come from, it's also allowing perhaps creatures from the past, creatures from other dimensions? You could even argue, like you were saying, that maybe Bigfoot existed thousands of years ago. Are these ghosts, as we would understand them, ghosts of creatures? So, yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts on portals? And bearing in mind that science are now investigating the reality of portals. They don't understand them, but they are appearing to suggest that they do exist. How do you think that plays into the paranormal and paranormal incidents and sightings?
I think it's a really interesting concept, but in one sense, we start to we're choosing to explain something unexplainable with something else unexplainable, which is a bit of a get out of jail free card, isn't it? Not to say that it couldn't be something like that, but we can't prove one without the other in a way, and we can't prove the other. So it's a bit of a I think it's really interesting. I don't I kind of love it if there were portals to the past, but I think it's something that might be just explaining our inability to explain things at the moment. Because if there's portals, but then fine, they disappear into the portal, they're gone, and that's why we can't figure it out. Maybe. So I don't know, and I'm not trying to dismiss it. I just think I've come to the point now in my fandom of these genres of never trying to defend the indefensible, which I used to do with cryptozoology and all the time, and get caught out. And I think, no, don't do it. It's okay to just be into the theories and see what you can find out.
I just place them up on the shelf with the other ones, and I'm aware of
Yeah.
them. And it becomes very difficult. But one big effort through research is demonstrating that seemingly quite a range of phenomena that seemingly is associated with perception alteration. In other words, what you're actually seeing is not truly what it is. And it's represented in a UFO phenomenon where UFOs have seemingly come down and advanced technology, incredible craft of some sort, but then it has portals with rivets around and it kind of something don't quite add up there. And not just regarding that, in paranormal aspects, many, many different things. People claiming that they saw animated toys which communicated with them. And, so there's a big problem I've seen when I said earlier about what is real. Can we believe our eyes and our ears during these experiences if we might be being manipulated somehow by some form of perception alteration via this, whatever this phenomenon represents. It's really, and if that is the case, then wow. I mean, how do we ever take anything so literal as in that is what we're seeing?
That's a hard one. It's a really hard one. I suppose the the sad fact of life is whatever is real to you, from an emotional perspective at least, is real because
Yeah.
it's what you experience, whether it's actually real in the reality, for want of a better word, then who knows? But it's real to you and you're experiencing it. It's going to be that's the meaning it's going to have in your life. So that aspect, it's a subjective genre, and of course we've got to find objective facts. I understand that, which are measurable in life. Objective, facts are measurable. Evidence is measurable. But we just, I suppose, this is
Spirit.
a multi-denominational, loosely connected religion of different faiths, right? And we're all have an ulterior motive. Like me with Nessie, I definitely have an ulterior, fixed idea and philosophy about that. Really do. And I cannot be objective about it. I know I can't be. There's no possible way I can be truly objective about that subject. It's just because it forms part of my core, desires for an outcome.
So if we consider Nessie, I mean, years back there was some research was done. Initially, people said that there was never enough food in the loch to support a large animal like Nessie. Then I believe some research was done to support the fact that yes, there is. Because you have large other animals, creatures, sturgeon, they can grow to a considerable size, but and there have been more than one sighting though around about the same time in different areas of the loch. It's very large, 21 miles long and how many wide? 6 mile maybe. But
No, about a mile and a half wide, but still big, really deep as well.
it's a
Really
big
deep.
area. But you would expect to have more than one of these things living there, considering that if we're talking from the 1930s and God knows how long it's been there, they've been there must be some type of family of them or something, you would expect. Then it was taught that there were tunnels or cave systems that ran to the sea. It would have been from a sea creature who got trapped into fresh water. There's lots and lots of interesting things that have been caught, some very unusual radar that's been caught on more than one occasion, going through the over the loch. So it does seem to be quite a good supporting evidence that something is there. It's just because it's so rarely seen, makes it become that mythical type area of a creature until one day one is caught, and we could say, well, okay, that would be the example of the coelacanth fish, which was apparently extinct for millions of years until they found it. So again, occasionally we are going to have these little surprises. I hope that's the case.
I really hope that's the case. I would love that. That's my dream before I die, hopefully not too soon, that the Nessie or whatever species that is discovered and protected, obviously.
Has to be done.
And yeah, and we actually have laws in place that would naturally protect it if it should be discovered anyway. It would be protected here. So, it's a great thing. And but really a lot of this as well, Steve and Mark, is the love of the chase.
Yes.
I've struggled with this. Do we actually want to find them in reality and turn that kraken into a giant squid again? Is that what we want? Then turn that Nessie into a plesiosaur or whatever it is, like a giant salamander or whatever the thing is. Then it's gone. And if you see a giant squid in the museum now, in formaldehyde or whatever they store it in, it's impressive. But you're not like, oh my goodness, the kraken. It's just like, oh, giant squid, and that's it. It's kind of done. It's
I
sort
would
of
have.
sad.
Yeah, I don't think I'd want. I mean, if everything was all resolved tomorrow, I'd be out of a job. That's one problem.
You would be out of job.
I mean, that leads nicely actually to. I mean, we're probably getting close to wrapping this up. But I mean, Andy, where do you see paranormal research going over the next few years? Like you said, it's a different world now than what it was even 10, 20 years ago. We're all instantly connected, information shared. Now, with that comes a lot of duff information, hoax information. You've got to separate all that. But I mean, with the UFO thing in mind? It seems to be taken a little bit more seriously now by members of the media. Do you see paranormal research being taken more seriously as we move forward?
I do. I think generally speaking, and so actually sometimes some of the channels looking at stuff like this, even though it's watchable TV, a Discovery Channel, History Channel, the rest of that stuff, they've got to make watchable programs. That's a bit sensational sometimes. I get it. It still creates an interest in the general public. And I'd say a lot more of the general public have a bigger interest in this, people who are not sort of into it, so to speak, peripheral people than they ever had before. And I find that through the program, actually, occasionally a few people, very few people who've seen the show come up to me and have talked about, oh, I wasn't, I was sort of interested in that subject a little bit. And I saw what you posted about it, or I saw what you covered in the episode. And yeah, I've really got into it. And I'm finding my feet. This is an interesting subject and like a hobby almost. And I think it's okay to be a hobby. People have lives. You can't expect them to be hopeless lifers like us in the genre who can't quit. They've got to live and do things as well. So it's nice if you can give them a neatly packaged something, almost a peripheral, an overview, a beginner's starter package that they can be into and get into without too much risk. And if they want to probe a bit further, they will, and more power to them.
Well said. Yeah, it's exactly right. I mean, there is a lot of variety, a lot of different shows I've seen over the years. Some weren't very good, some were very good. I mean, it's just, it's very difficult to have somebody and make it entertaining because 9 times out of the 10, like Andy, you will go out there and it'll be an uneventful, and how to wrap a TV series around unevents. Nobody wants to watch. Do you want to watch it where something is unfolding? That is a very problematic area to try and make this an entertainment. I think maybe research and some scientific tests with certain types of equipment. But you know what? That's not going to last forever. At some point, people say, "Well, show me the evidence. Show me. Show me. I want to know where it is. I want to see what it is." And if we can't provide it, it's sometimes they die a death, and this is why you have a recycle of very similar shows over the years, and many been on Loch Ness over the years from different angles. But I do find that at one point, it's going to be so hard to produce series if there is no goods, because it's like watching a paranormal show and nothing happens. And 9 times out of the 10, that's usually the case when you're involved in these things. To be lucky at the time, to be there just at that moment in time, that's just down to luck. We don't seem to be in control of those factors. And the camera's running at the same time, if you're lucky. Well, so it is difficult. But like I say, the passion is always there because every time you go out, you just think to yourself, today's the day.
Today's the day, and I've stared at that lock for hundreds of hours, and I've not seen a bean, nothing ever. I even had my honeymoon at the Loch Ness Lodge,
Oh,
in 2012, and from the breakfast table, we were looking out to the loch. They were describing, some past sightings, and 2 years later, from that very same room, 9 diners saw a big boat-shaped, upturned boat-shaped hub emerge out of the loch, swim in like an S shape, and then sink right from the window. And I was like,
wow.
ah,
Well, typical, isn't it? It's just that always just out of distance, isn't it? Just out of reach,
just at a distance. I want it too much. I've got to be one of these guys who doesn't give a jack, and then suddenly there it is staring me in the face.
doesn't it?
I,
Well, I think that's been a good show, Marcus. I think
yeah, I was going to say we've covered some ground. Andy, thanks ever so much for joining us. I know you're busy.
Oh, I loved it. Thank you.
I know you're filming Weird Britain right now.
Yeah.
What sort of stuff have you got coming up? I know second season of Weird Britain.
Yeah.
The floor's yours,
Okay, so the second season of Weird Britain starts on Blaze, which I think is channel 63, 64, and Freeview on the 7th of May. So it's double episode. Worcester, number one. There's 2 episodes of Worcester. And Scotland, again. And there's some really interesting things in there. Oliver Cromwell, Rosslyn Chapel we got into. Surprise there. It's hard to get in there. We got in, and we got an expert that spent years there by inviting the family, investigating all of the symbols to explain everything inside the church to us as well. So that's going to be really interesting, and lots of other bits. There were lovely bits there. So that's 12 episodes, and we're out now filming Weird Britain 3. We're in Shropshire at the moment. And
Yes.
but yeah,
Yeah.
just just around about and looking at a few interesting things. But personally, from my perspective, I've released the first two installments of a children's book series called Ulster Kids Guide. The first one is Nessie, and then Yeti, obviously. And
Yeah.
there's going to be 12 in total, and they're pocket-sized pals. They're passport size. It's like 90 pages. The background, the history, the sightings, the hoaxes, some of the facts, some of the little bits and pieces, and then do it yourself. Kind of go online, or if you're even in the location, look at some of these locales and investigate and make your own notes. And it's for childlike adults and children who love the mysteries of the world we live in.
Yeah, that is. Yeah. I just want to finish off on one last question. The Gremlin footage. Do you think it's real, or do you think it's fake? Gremlin. Gremlin. Roger Patterson.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I think it's real. There's definitely something there.
Ew.
I've heard lots of people talk for a long time
Yes.
about how the musculature and everything couldn't be made to look like that at that time, and that the walk is impossible for a human. And I'm not sure if that's completely 100% bona fide true. So maybe that's a bit more TV. I know Jeff Meldrum, who's like a real expert on this. He really believes it. He's an anthropologist. I forget what you call it. He's
Yeah.
not a podiatrist, but foot morphology is his specialist area of anthropology. He believes it, so I'd say he knows more than me. But there's something about it. Of course, America is a mercantile place, and their careers. There's a big conference of careers made upon these things. That goes round and round every single year, and it just makes me doubt it. And I doubt it because they're different to us in that nature. Sorry, Americans, not bad mouthing you. It's a mercantile nation. And if there's money to be made and there's PR in it, it will
Oh,
continue. And then it's hard to find the truth
it really
behind that. And
makes it harder as time goes on. But I have recently seen some blown ups, um, um, enhanced of the face, and this, you can wear some type of ape suit all day long, and never would you get those the nose and the facial expressions and the sizing and the.
okay.
You know what? I do believe it's an authentic, and isn't it always strange, just to finish up on that? Sometimes, even when you've got the greatest piece of evidence, some people say it's still too good to believe.
Too good to be true. There's no way it could be real. Look how clear it is.
Exactly.
Why is it so blurry?
And that's a good point to finish up on there, I think. Andy, thank you ever so much for joining us. We really do. We'd love to have you back on. We've really enjoyed it. Steve,
Yes.
likewise, thank you. It's been a brilliant show. So really, just to remind everybody then to leave your thoughts in the comments. Remember to subscribe to our channel, follow us on social media, and check out the Anomaly Project podcast.com for articles, further updates and news, and of course, information on episodes. Until next time, goodbye and take care.